actually joined by Alex and Brett, two of our good friends from Cole, Freeman, and Mallon. Alex and Brett, please introduce yourself briefly.
Thanks so much. My name is Alex Ustremska. I'm at Cole, Freeman, and Mallon in the corporate transactional group. We represent both crypto funds like Polychain, as well as operators in the space such as Aerodrome and Ondo. We also represent startups in the space, everything from Web3 to blockchain to digital assets that are coming out of services providers.
And I'm Brett Bonnell. I'm also a partner of the corporate group at Cole, Freeman, and Mallon. I've been in this space since the early days of the ICO craze in 2016, 2017. And like Alex said, we represent both the startups from pre-seed all the way to becoming mature middle market companies on the Web3 space, including AI, including emerging technology, and the investors that invest in them. So we've been around for a while, excited to be here today. So thanks for having us, Nono.
Awesome. And once again, thanks for joining us. It's a great pleasure to really have this talk with you. I think, without further ado, let's actually get started on the first topic that we're going to cover today, which is something that I believe every single founder is going to have to go through, and that is, their legal entity, right? I think, the first question I want to ask on this is, how does a Web3 startup form their own company, right? And are there any major differences that you usually see with Web2 entities?
Yeah, absolutely. So think of your entity as your vehicle that's going to scale with you from the beginning until you exit, and hopefully it's very successful. So for a web, any type of entity, you need that legal framework. So you're going to pick a state when you're coming to the US, which typically is Delaware, but there are definitely emerging trends with Texas, Nevada, becoming a lot more popular than it used to be. We'll see if that micro trend continues on, but you've got to pick a state, and that's not an easy decision to make, because you can go any of these states, go to the Secretary of State website and form your entity by filing the certificate of incorporation. But if you don't know what you're doing, you may get yourself into trouble because you have to build this vehicle out. It is like a car. It has a body, it has a frame, and you fill it out. And when it comes to Web3 versus Web2, there are some differences that the car is going to feel the same unless you want to do unique things. So for example, a DAO. If you're going to be a DAO and that is important to your structure, well then there are different choices of entity where the typical entity is a C Corp. That's what most venture-backed emerging companies are going to be in the Web3 space if they're going to be onshore in the United States. However, if you want to be a DAO, you're looking at things like Wyoming has a DAO LLC specific to that state because it is a crypto-friendly state, and that's very unique, right? And then there are other entities like Borgs, Dunas, which is a decentralized, unincorporated associations. If you're going to be more than just, hey, we want to raise Silicon Valley money and then scale the startup, we actually want to be truly decentralized with our governance, our vehicle to start. That's much different than Web2. Web2 is going to be that C Corp. I mean, Alex, is there anything you would add to that?
That's a great point. I mean, the vast majority of startups in this space do create a corporation to house the IP, the equity, and the token project. That corp is very often in Delaware, given that the founders may be from various jurisdictions in various countries. Crypto investors are also familiar with Delaware as a state of incorporation for a startup. So I would say the vast majority of projects start off with a Delaware corp and are looking at whether an optimized structure as an alternative would be good for them.
Yeah, and I would add to that, look, if for a lot of the Web3 companies are going to issue a token and plan to have a TG and go out there and raise money with their token or not, this is where they start to look at the other part of the coin, which is a foundation. Now, it used to be the last 5 years to be somewhere offshore outside the United States. So you could be British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Dubai, Singapore, Switzerland, somewhere over in Europe. There's different jurisdictions out there. But now with the US coming around in terms of being more friendly to crypto, we're going to see more onshore structures. There's a recent A16 article about this, and we saw this much earlier in the year happening. So if you want to be in the US, you can be in the US. And that's why the onshore foundation, if you even need it anymore, is going to be more likely than the offshore foundation that's been the norm the past 5 years for a company that's going to issue a token.
Right. I think, that's super comprehensive. First and foremost, I would actually like to get, a slightly bit more, practical. Say I am, an offshore founder, right? And I'm looking to, get into the United States and as well as obviously build my project within the United States, right? So would you be able to go through kind of a high level, step-by-step process of how I would go about doing so?
Sure. Let's assume for all intents and purposes that Delaware Corporation is the way to go. Whether or not you start off with an LLC or a corp is something you'll talk about with your lawyer. But given that most projects start off with a Delaware corp, let's use that as an example. There is no restriction for non-US founders to open a Delaware corp. There are a minority of jurisdictions that are on a safety list, which has to be addressed, but for the vast majority of founders in this space, Delaware does not pose a restriction for them. If you are starting up that entity, there are a couple of key pieces of information that you need to have ready to provide. One is the capital structure. Is the founder going to own all of the equity, the common stock of the Delaware Corp on day one, and assign that equity out to other team members, to a stock option plan, and potentially to founders? Or is the founding team larger than that? Does the founding team need to divvy up that initial pot of equity? How you divide up that equity is important, whether or not you allocate a portion of it at the outset or down the road to an employee stock option plan is important. You can sidestep some of those issues initially, but you will end up having to address that. The second thing you need when you're preparing to set up that startup US-based company are IP protection documents. The founder, the founding team, directors, officers, dev team members, down to consultants and administrative staff, we recommend that you sign confidential information and invention assignment agreements. That is a key piece of due diligence that crypto investors are going to want to look at to make sure that you have full protection and ownership of the intellectual property that's backing your crypto project.
I would add some practical things that I think these documents are capturing. So I'm a former tech founder, and when you're coming to the US, are you a solo founder? Are you a co-founder? How tight is that relationship? Because all the things that Alex just talked about, it's going to capture what you guys are agreed upon. So if you're two founders and you say, hey, we're going to split this 50-50 with equity, well, that's going to be captured in the documents. So we really want to make sure that you have those conversations, being prepared to talk with attorneys, being prepared to set up your company. It means having conversations. So same vein for tokens. If you're like, hey, we're going to issue a token, okay, or we're going to do a stable coin, or at least tokens, what percentage do we want to have for the team? Let's say we have a few contributors that are in different countries. Well, let's make sure we take care of them and compensate them, because we're not paying them salaries day one. We don't have the money yet. We're coming to the US to fundraise. So have those conversations with the team. You can comp them with tokens. You can paper that in the documents. And that goes for your founders as well. So you want to lay out that token table. So just like you have a cap table on Carta, Poly, Fidelity Private Shares, these cap table management softwares, that's the same thing with your token table. Poly does that as well. So you're managing, hey, we're going to do 40% for the community. The other 60% is for our early team, our investors. I mean, these are typical numbers you see out there. And depending on where you want to drive the value as a founder, what's most important? Is it the token itself? Is it the equity of the company? Is it both? Then you plan for that, because you're going to have a white paper. We love to see white papers. I love to see demos if you have like an MVP, because that white paper is going to be something we're going to need as you get into fundraising, and that's also investors are going to want to see.
Gotcha. I mean, I love your emphasis on the importance of figuring out your token allocation, your tokenomics. I believe so many founders get this wrong from day one, right? They think that, this is something for, the distant future, and that they don't need to worry about it until maybe it's like 2-3 weeks before they're trying to list, which is exactly what you're not supposed to do, right? Having a real demand, having real utility, as well as figuring out how much everyone should be getting is something that they need to have done since day one. Okay, great. I think we did talk a little bit on company structure, right? Equity, ownership structure, as well as, token allocation and token tables and such. I would love for you to, go over just really quickly, how a project would usually go about, forming their actual ownership structure. You mentioned a couple of digital tools for that, so I'd love for you to quickly go through that if you can.
Yeah, so I think with the equity part, you have one pie to start. And if that's going to be a good chunk of the value, like protect it. I have founders who own 80% plus of their company still after raising tens of millions of dollars in Web3 through tokens and or equity. I have founders who get all the way to Series E and they have 10% of their company. It is a judgment call. So day one, you're thinking about what are my goals? How big is our core team? And then talk about, well, hey, so-and-so is the CEO and they're the number one value source and they started this project in the first place. Versus, okay, now we've added, I found a co-founder who's technical, CTO, and they're gonna be the engineer of the blockchain, the network, building it out. Okay, well, they should get a good chunk, and maybe is it a third of that initial pie? Because initially it's just the founders. We don't have investors yet, so they're not affecting the cap table. So I think talking about that, and then that's gonna relate to what, I think you mentioned IP, like how does that actually get to the entity? Well, each of the founders, they're going to contribute the IP in exchange for their stock and or tokens. Their sweat equity and what they're going to create now. They've already created and they will in the future. So you figure out what that is and then say, does this make sense? I mean, if I see a cap table where it's 50-50, I'm actually going to ask a question like, what happens if there's a tie? We actually need to have that conversation. Or if it's three founders and they're all 33 and a third percent, maybe there's a founder that's a little more important, or should we have a tiebreaker to work on decisions that come up? And then make sure we have all the IP to the right entity, because that's what investors are going to look for in due diligence. Who's the founding team, especially at an early stage, pre-seed, seed, who's the founding team? What's the IP they're building? What's the idea? What's the problem they're solving? Do we want to invest in that? And do the ducks line up with the documents?
I think we need to clarify one point on the token side. You don't have to have a complete token allocation table on day one. You do need to have the infrastructure in place in order to be able to track your grants and your obligations to investors and workers as you build your token project, as you bring on additional team members and strategize for your ultimate token launch. The documents that Brett and I implement for our clients are flexible in that when you give out token rights to workers or to investors, it allows you to adjust your token allocation table as needed for the sake of the project. In fact, you may never end up with a token launch, and that's okay. There is no obligation under these documents that enforces you to launch a token.
Sure.
We work very hard with founders to make sure that their legal obligations give them the flexibility to adjust their token allocation table. It's just that as you start giving these commitments to folks, legal obligations, your options become more and more limited. So keep in mind, many projects start out without a fully baked token project concept, or they pivot partway through. That does not mean you need to start over again. And how we determine when to do your TGE is built on commercial aspects, community aspects, and legal aspects. It may be, as you're looking at your token project, that there are legal risks you need to address that require changes and may affect your token allocation table.
Right. I think then it goes without saying that maybe I should have rephrased a bit of what I said. I think you definitely want to have a good concept of the entire structure of your token table when you're building a project. However, you should always be open to pivots. You should always be open to reallocating some of those portions to the right people that are contributing.
We find that comes up a lot, especially when you bring in strategic crypto investors. They may have opportunities for a startup to deploy and to spur adoption that builds on but changes the original concept.